Did you ever had that eerie feeling that someone or something was watching you? You're not alone. Before we uncover the terrifying truth, like this video and comment your location, let's step into the shadows together. I've never told anyone this story before. What happened during my drive through Nevada's desert highways still haunts me, making me question everything I thought I knew about reality. It was the summer of 2019, and I was making the long drive from San Francisco to Denver for a new job opportunity. Being young and broke, I decided to do the journey in one straight shot, planning to drive through the night. The sun had just set when I pulled into a rest stop somewhere between Elko and Wells. My GPS had lost signal about an hour back, but I wasn't worried. The highway was straight enough, and I just needed a quick break to stretch my legs and use the bathroom. The rest stop looked ordinary enough. A small concrete building, a few scattered picnic tables, and a single flickering light illuminating the parking lot. What struck me as odd was how empty it was. Usually these highway rest stops have at least a few trucks parked overnight, but there wasn't a single vehicle in sight. Still, I really needed that bathroom break, so I pulled in and parked near the building. The moment I stepped out of my car, something felt wrong. The air was completely still. No wind, no insects chirping, no distant highway sounds. Just absolute silence. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I quickened my pace to the bathroom, the sound of my footsteps on the concrete echoing unnaturally loud. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered, casting strange shadows on the grimy tiles. As I was washing my hands, I heard the bathroom door creak open behind me. In the mirror, I could see an elderly man in a park ranger uniform step in. He smiled, but something about his expression made my skin crawl. "Long drive ahead?" he asked, his voice oddly hollow. "Yeah, heading to Denver," I replied, trying to sound casual while avoiding eye contact. "Shame about what happened here last month," he said, still smiling. "Those poor folks never saw it coming." I turned around to ask what he meant, but he was gone. The door hadn't made a sound. My heart racing, I rushed back to my car, only to freeze in my tracks. In the dim light of the parking lot, I could now see what I'd missed before. Dozens of dark stains spread across the concrete, leading to and from where my car was parked. As I got closer, I realized with horror that they were handprints. Hundreds of them, dried into the concrete, as if people had been dragging themselves across the parking lot. Some of the prints were impossibly small, like those of children. I jumped into my car and turned the key. Nothing. The engine wouldn't start. That's when I noticed something in my rearview mirror. The Ranger was standing directly behind my car, still smiling that awful smile. But now, in the mirror's reflection, his uniform was covered in dark stains, and his eyes were completely black. I tried the engine again, and this time, it roared to life. I slammed the gas pedal and peeled out of there, my tires screeching against the concrete. In my rearview mirror, I watched as the rest stop's single light flickered out, plunging the area into darkness. The next morning, after reaching Denver, I tried to look up information about that rest stop. I found nothing about any incidents there, but what I did find chilled me to the bone. According to the Nevada Department of Transportation website, there hadn't been a rest stop on that stretch of highway for over 30 years. The last one was demolished in 1987 after a series of unexplained disappearances. I've made that drive several times since then, always during daylight hours. I've never been able to find that rest stop again, but sometimes, when I pass through that stretch of highway, my GPS signal dies, and I catch a glimpse of a flickering light in the distance. This happened during my second year of college, back in 2018. I was driving home for Thanksgiving break, taking the back roads through rural Pennsylvania to avoid holiday traffic. It was already dark, and a heavy rain had started falling, making visibility poor. I was about 4 hours into my 6-hour drive when I saw her, a young woman in a blue raincoat, walking along the side of the road. Initially, I drove past. My parents had always warned me never to pick up hitchhikers. But something made me stop. Through my rearview mirror, I could see her huddled against the rain, looking so vulnerable and lost. Against my better judgment, I put the car in reverse. "Need a ride?" I called out through the passenger window. She couldn't have been much older than me, maybe early 20s, with long, dark hair plastered to her face from the rain. "Oh, thank God," she said, quickly sliding into the passenger seat. "I've been walking for hours. My car broke down back there and there's no cell service out here." As we drove, she introduced herself as Sarah and explained she was heading to her grandmother's house in the next town over. Something about her seemed off. She kept fidgeting with her raincoat zipper and glancing nervously at the rearview mirror. "Everything okay?" I asked after her fifth backward glance. She hesitated before speaking. "Can I ask you something weird? Have you noticed any other cars following us? Like a dark SUV?" I checked my mirrors. The road behind us was empty. "No, why?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I wasn't completely honest before. My car didn't break down. I abandoned it on purpose because someone was following me. I've been seeing the same dark SUV everywhere for the past week, outside my apartment, at my workplace, even parked outside my gym. Today, when I left work, it started following me again. I panicked and just left my car and started walking. I felt a chill run down my spine. Have you called the police?" They said they couldn't do anything without proof. I was starting to think I was going crazy, imagining things. She paused, then added in a whisper, "Until I found the photos." "Photos?" "Yesterday, someone slipped an envelope under my apartment door. Inside were dozens of photos of me, sleeping in my bed, eating dinner, working at my desk, all taken through my windows. And there was a note." Her voice cracked. It said, "Your grandmother's house isn't safe anymore." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "We should call the police right now." "There's no service out here, remember? Just please get me to my grandmother's house. It's just past the next town." We drove in tense silence for the next 20 minutes. The rain had gotten heavier, drumming against the roof of the car. That's when I saw them, headlights in my rearview mirror moving fast, a dark SUV. "Sarah," I said, my voice shaking, "is that—" But when I turned to look at her, the passenger seat was empty. No Sarah, no raincoat, nothing to indicate anyone had been sitting there at all. Panicked, I pulled over and called the police. When they finally arrived, I told them everything. The officer's face went pale as I described Sarah and mentioned her grandmother's house. "Son," he said, "I think you need to come with me to the station." At the police station, they showed me a photo. It was Sarah, the same young woman who had been in my car, but the photo was from a missing persons case from 1985. Sarah had disappeared while driving to her grandmother's house on that same road. Her car was found abandoned, but she was never seen again. The officer told me they had recently reopened her case because of new evidence. 3 days before I picked her up, they had arrested a former police officer who had been stalking women in the area during the 1980s. In his house, they found photos of his victims, including Sarah, along with detailed journals of his crimes. The most disturbing part? He had always left photos and notes for his victims before taking them, and his signature was forcing them to abandon their cars and walk to their final destination. He died in custody the day before I made my drive. I still drive that road sometimes, usually during the day. But when it rains, I swear I can see a figure in a blue raincoat walking along the shoulder, warning other drivers about the dangers that lurk in the darkness. Looking back, I should have known something was wrong when my GPS rerouted me through that small town in rural Michigan. It was March 2020, right as the pandemic was beginning, and I was making an emergency drive from Chicago to my parents' house in upstate New York. The highways were eerily empty, and a late winter storm was approaching from the west. The detour took me off the main highway and onto progressively smaller roads until I found myself driving through what appeared to be an abandoned town. The streets were lined with boarded-up shops and empty houses, their windows dark and uninviting. My GPS insisted this was the fastest route, though something about it felt off. The first sign of life I saw was a gas station, its fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow in the growing darkness. My tank was running low, so I pulled in. The price per gallon displayed on the ancient pump was impossibly low, $1.15. That should have been my second warning. Inside, a bell chimed as I pushed open the door. The cashier, an elderly woman with thick glasses, looked up from her newspaper. "You're not from around here," she said. It wasn't a question. "Just passing through," I replied, handing her my credit card. "Bad storm coming, I hear." She stared at my card as if she'd never seen one before. "We don't get many visitors these days, not since the accident." She pushed my card back across the counter. "Cash only." As I counted out bills, I noticed her newspaper. The date at the top read March 15th, 1983. Before I could comment, a loud static burst came from a radio behind the counter, making me jump. "It's starting," the woman said, her voice suddenly urgent. "You need to leave. Now, take Elm Street to the highway. Don't stop for anything. And whatever you do, don't follow the lights." Back in my car, I tried to pull up directions on my phone, but the screen was dead despite being fully charged moments ago. The sky had turned an unnatural shade of green, and in the distance, I could see strange lights dancing along the horizon. I found Elm Street and turned onto it, trying to ignore how the houses seemed to lean inward, their shadows stretching impossibly long in the fading light. That's when my radio sprang to life, cycling through stations of static before settling on a clear signal. "This is an emergency broadcast," a voice crackled through the speakers. At 8:47 p.m. on March 15, 1983, an unknown event occurred at the Marshall Chemical Research Facility. All residents within a 10-mile radius of the facility are ordered to evacuate immediately. Do not attempt to observe the atmospheric phenomenon. Do not follow the lights. Repeat, do not follow the lights. The broadcast began to loop, but underneath it, I could hear something else. Voices, hundreds of them, whispering words I couldn't quite make out. The lights on the horizon were getting closer, pulsing with an otherworldly rhythm. My car's engine started to sputter. The headlights flickered and died. In the darkness, I could now see that the lights weren't just in the sky. They were moving through the streets, flowing like liquid between the houses. And in their glow, I saw shapes moving, things that looked almost human, but weren't quite right. Through my panic, I remembered the old woman's warning: don't follow the lights. I turned off the main road, driving blind through back alleys and side streets, using the strange aurora above as a guide for what areas to avoid. After what felt like hours, but could only have been minutes, I burst out onto a highway. My car's systems came back to life all at once: headlights, engine, GPS. According to my phone, only 20 minutes had passed since I'd stopped for gas. The storm had cleared, and the sky was normal again. When I reached my parents' house, I immediately researched the town. What I found haunts me to this day. In 1983, a small research facility in rural Michigan reported a chemical spill. The town was evacuated, but when authorities arrived the next day, they found it completely empty. Over 200 people had vanished without a trace. The official report blamed a mass hysteria that caused the residents to flee, but no one was ever found. The town was demolished in 1985 and removed from all maps. According to official records, nothing exists there now except empty fields. But sometimes, on stormy nights, drivers report seeing strange lights in that area, and their GPS devices inexplicably route them through streets that shouldn't exist. I've tried to find that gas station again. I've driven through that area multiple times, following the exact route my GPS took that night. But all I've found are empty fields and a single, weathered sign warning of chemical contamination. Yet, every time I pass through, my car radio picks up fragments of that same emergency broadcast, still playing after all these years, warning people not to follow the lights.